Today we're going to talk about some efficiencies in the market. Now, we already discussed the concept of consumer surplus. That's when you, as an example, might have been willing to spend $3 on a cup of coffee, but the price was only $2. That leaves an extra dollar in your pocket that you can spend on something else. And we've seen producer surplus is similarly when the producer would have been willing to sell that coffee for $2 but didn't have to. They sold it for $3. They're more than happy to take what's called producer surplus. Now, one way to look at it is in the market, the demand comes from rich people, middle class people, and poor people. And the rich people, of course, are the ones getting that consumer surplus because they could have afforded to spend more, or maybe even willing to spend more, but didn't have to. The middle class typically can afford things, but they may not necessarily have a whole lot left over. So no consumer surplus for them. The poor may not even be able to afford the item. They're out of the market because they just can't choose that item. However, when a producer produces something more efficiently, what happens? The market forces them to cut the price. They're being more efficient. That's the way to be competitive, is to cut the price. So when they cut the price, that means more consumer surplus. So that means some people who could barely make ends meet are now affording that with a little bit more. Think of it as Walmart comes to town, because when Walmart comes to town, people pay lower prices, and when they pay lower prices, they can afford to buy more. So with that extra consumer surplus, there's still some poor that can't afford even Walmart, and there's still some rich who can afford Walmart and then some. Now, let's take a look at this chart from a different perspective. Let's assume Coke and Pepsi are in a competitive market and there's an equilibrium price. Supply and demand is intersecting there. This may happen, as an example, on a college campus somewhere near you. And what happens is perhaps Pepsi goes and makes a contract with the college and says, I want to be the exclusive seller of soda products and beverages and so on, vending machine products on your campus. And why would the government do that? Why would the college do that? Well, because they may be getting themselves a little bit of money on this deal. Maybe Pepsi, as an example, might say, we will pay for your scoreboard in your gym, and with that, we'll have the money. If we give you that, we will accept the contract of a 10-year exclusive right to be the ones to provide vending machine services on campus. Now, when that happens, you're going to find that the government has typically led to a higher price. The government collusion with business leads to a higher price, less quantity, and more profit. That's what we can see from this chart here. Now, there's also that little thing called the kickback. That kickback might be government revenue, such as a new scoreboard in the gym, or in some cases it could be a political campaign contribution. So oftentimes someone who has given money to a campaign ends up winning a contract. So let's move on to third-party help. What happens there? When someone's willing to help you afford things, you can now say, I only had $5 in my pocket, and somebody's willing to give me an additional $5. Now I can spend up to $10 at the bookstore or at the ice cream stand or wherever it is you're going. So demand changes when you have more money. By third party, I could mean someone like grandma or grandpa, the parents. It could be an insurance company who helps pay your dental costs or your eye care. It could be government, it could be private charities. All those things can allow you to buy more than what you can afford because they're giving you extra money in effect. So, what happens when the government pays rent for a single mom? Well, she can move out on her own. She doesn't need to live with somebody else, so that means there's a greater demand for housing. Okay, we can see that, and the number of apartments in the city will be greater, number of rented apartments, because we have one more person who maybe would have had to live with a family member, but now gets to live out on her own. But what does that do? That raises the price, so that everybody, including those working poor who are just barely getting by, maybe working 2 minimum wage jobs, they're going to find that their rent increased because of all that increased demand. And it's going to make it tougher for them to make ends meet.